My paternity test results came back negative, but my wife still insisted that she didn't cheat, so we did another test, and this one revealed a very disturbing truth. From the day my daughter Ava was born, she looked nothing like me. As her hair started growing and some of the early stages of her features came to light, I started paying more attention, and noticed that she had her mother's hair, and I could see her mother's resemblance in her facial structures, but none of mine. This drove me crazy on the inside, so I got a paternity test done behind my wife's back. I was in my car when I opened the results, and as soon as I saw I was not the father, I started driving towards the highest bridge I knew. I was running on so much emotion that in that moment, I genuinely contemplated stopping at the bridge, getting out my car, and leaping off the bed, leaving everything behind. What was the point of it all? Those were my thoughts in that moment. Luckily, I managed to rationalize the situation in my head, and thankfully, I realized that belly flopping off the highest effing bridge I could find is not the answer. I drove home with tears in my eyes, in disbelief that my wife could ever betray me like that. My wife had been everything to me, and besides that one stupid girl's holiday she went on around the time she got pregnant, she had been the best girlfriend ever. One afternoon, while she was out shopping and Ava was napping, I found myself staring at our wedding photo on the mantel. We looked so happy, so in love. I tried so hard to convince myself my wife Jessica loved me, and that she would never cheat, that the test was wrong. But that was naive and foolish thinking on my end. My need for answers grew stronger with each passing day, until finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to confront Jessica, to get the truth, and make sense of this. One night after we put Ava to sleep, I sat Jessica down. At first, Jessica laughed, thinking it was a joke after I hit her with the question of whether or not she slept with anyone else. Her laughter was light, but it faded quickly when she saw the seriousness in my eyes. Her expression shifted from amusement to confusion as she realized I wasn't joking. She asked me what on earth made me think that she was cheating. I explained that Ava looked a lot like her but had none of my features. I confessed that I had taken a paternity test behind her back and that the results confirmed my worst fears. Ava wasn't my daughter. Jessica's face twisted with confusion. Her eyes searched mine, trying to find some hint that I was lying or mistaken. She stuttered, genuinely confused, insisting that she had never cheated. The more she insisted on her innocence, the harder it became for me to believe her. My doubts were already here, and every word she spoke felt like an attempt to cover up her betrayal. I pressed her, demanding that she admit to sleeping with someone else at some point. I told her to stop pretending, to stop acting like she was too good for me. She already knew my insecurities. I knew she probably cheated since I had gained weight, and she was always considered the more attractive partner. She had to think that she deserved someone better. Her eyes filled with a mix of anger and hurt. Her face flushed as she tried to make sense of my accusations. She insisted again and again that she hadn't cheated, but I just couldn't accept her words as the truth. As I kept pushing her, Jessica's frustration finally exploded. Her voice got louder and angrier. She was really mad that I had taken the test without telling her. Her anger and hurt grew as she defended herself, her loyalty, and our relationship. She felt hurt that I doubted her and let my own worries mess up our relationship. She told me how angry and sad that I had let my insecurities cause her so much pain. She was furious that I had gone behind her back and taken the test without telling her, and this reaction seemed like a confirmation of my suspicions. If she was so angry, didn't that mean she had something to hide? I thought. Her outburst felt like proof that she was guilty, that my fears were justified. My mind latched onto this idea. The room felt tense and heavy. This had left us both emotionally drained and confused. The trust we once had felt broken, replaced by a big gap of doubt and misunderstanding that neither of us knew how to fix. The next morning the house felt colder, filled with an uncomfortable silence. The confrontation from the night before replayed in my mind. Jessica's explosive reaction seemed like undeniable proof that she had cheated. As I got dressed, I felt a grim acceptance settle over me. This marriage couldn't continue on the foundation of lies and betrayal. I needed to see a divorce lawyer. With my keys in hand, I headed toward the door, my mind made up. Just as I reached for the doorknob, she stopped me. I turned around to see her standing there, looking both determined and desperate. For a moment, I thought she was about to confess, to finally admit to the affair that had shattered my trust. But instead, Jessica asked me to sit down. She swore on her dear mother's grave that she had not cheated. She swore that her trip to Miami just before her pregnancy was a coincidence, and that she understands the logical reasoning behind my assumptions, but that truly, nothing had happened. The depth of her sincerity made me pause. Jessica insisted that we needed to do another paternity test, because she was convinced that Ava had to be mine. She spoke with such conviction that it was impossible to ignore. As I listened to her, a flicker of doubt crept into my mind. What if there was another explanation? What if my accusations were wrong? Despite the turmoil inside me, I found myself agreeing to one more test, hoping that it might finally provide the clarity we both so desperately needed. We waited for the results of the second paternity test. The tension in the air was so thick you could cut it with a knife. When the results finally came in, they once again confirmed my worst fears. Ava wasn't my daughter. Jessica's reaction this time was completely different. Instead of anger directed at me, it was a raw, confused expressed fury. She couldn't understand how this was possible. She demanded answers that I couldn't provide. Then out of nowhere, she insisted on taking a maternity test herself. Her suggestion left me baffled. What was she trying to prove? Jessica's eyes were fierce, as she swore that if Ava wasn't mine, then she couldn't be hers either. Her determination was unshakable, and despite my confusion, I agreed to go along with it. The wait for the maternity test results felt never-ending. When they finally arrived, the outcome was more shocking than anything I could have imagined. The test revealed that Ava wasn't Jessica's daughter either. Jessica had been right all along. She hadn't cheated. But this revelation opened up a new, horrifying question. If Ava wasn't ours, then whose child was she? We both went to the hospital, demanding an explanation. After a lot of drama and back-and-forth discussions with the hospital staff, the truth finally emerged. The hospital had made a terrible mistake at birth and given us the wrong baby. Ava, the child we had loved and cared for, was not ours. This was devastating. We were heartbroken and angry, coming to terms with the reality that our real child had been with another family all this time. This horrific mix-up had turned our lives upside down. We initiated a legal battle against the hospital. We knew that the case would be complex and emotionally draining, with hearings and legal proceedings stretching out before us. The hospital's realization that they had given us the wrong baby at birth was horrifying enough, but the ordeal was far from over. When they admitted their mistake, they couldn't immediately locate the other family who had our biological child. It took weeks of agonizing waiting as the hospital conducted a frantic search to find them. Each day felt like an eternity, filled with a mix of hope and dread. During this time, Jessica and I continued to care for Ava, our emotions swinging between love for her and the heart-wrenching knowledge that she wasn't biologically ours. The uncertainty was unbearable. Every time the phone rang, we hoped it was news from the hospital. Finally, after what seemed like an endless stretch of time, the hospital informed us that they had found the other family. Arrangements were made for us to meet them in a neutral location. As the day approached, a knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach. How would we handle meeting the people who had been raising our child, and how would they react to the news that Ava wasn't theirs? The meeting took place in a small, private room at the hospital. The other family entered, looking just as nervous and apprehensive as we felt. They were holding our biological child, a baby boy with familiar features that made my heart ache. The moment was surreal and overwhelming. The other parents, clearly attached to the child they had been raising, looked at us with a mix of fear and sadness. I could see the bond they had formed with him, and it mirrored our attachment to Ava. The mother clutched the baby tightly, her eyes filled with tears as she struggled to comprehend the situation. When the hospital staff explained the gravity of the mix-up, the room was filled with heavy silence. The parents' initial shock turned to disbelief, and then to a reluctant acceptance. However, the mother's grip on the baby tightened as she looked at us, her expression pleading. She wasn't ready to let go. Jessica and I exchanged glances, our own hearts breaking. We understood their pain all too well. They had loved and cared for our son as their own, just as we had with Ava. The mother's unwillingness was obvious, and I couldn't blame her. The thought of handing Ava over to them filled me with a similar dread. Days turned into weeks as we navigated the painful process of transitioning the babies back to their biological families. We visited each other, trying to ease the emotional turmoil. The attachment we had for the babies we had raised didn't fade easily. Eventually, the time came for the final exchange. The other mother reluctantly handed our son to Jessica. Jessica cradled our boy, her own tears mingling with the bittersweet joy of finally holding our biological child. When it was time for us to hand Ava over, my heart shattered. She had been our world, and the thought of letting her go was almost unbearable, but I knew we had to do it. The other parents needed their daughter just as much as we needed our son. Now that we had the right child, we could focus more on the court battle with the hospital. Discovering the hospital's mistake that Ava wasn't our biological daughter threw us into a long, tough legal fight. Jessica and I wanted justice for the pain we went through, but we soon realized it would be a long and challenging process. We hired an experienced lawyer to help us sue the hospital for their mistake. He explained that this kind of lawsuit involved a lot of paperwork, gathering evidence, and many court appearances. We had to tell our story again and again, each time feeling the pain of our discovery all over. The hospital's legal team was strong and tried to reduce their responsibility. They examined every detail of our case, sometimes questioning our truthfulness. It felt like we were always defending ourselves, proving how much the hospital's mistake had affected our lives. Court hearings were scheduled then rescheduled, dragging the process out. Every hearing was exhausting, filled with complicated legal language and delays. The hospital's representatives talked about our suffering like it was just a financial issue, not a real, heartbreaking experience. Our lawyer collected testimonies from medical experts, hospital staff, and other families who had faced similar mistakes. Each piece of evidence was carefully checked and presented in court. The huge amount of paperwork was overwhelming, but it was necessary for our case. Court sessions were emotionally draining. We listened to lawyers argue about the events that had changed our lives. Nurses and doctors involved in the mix-up gave testimonies, some apologetic, others defensive. The hospital tried to settle out of court multiple times, offering money to avoid a public trial. Each offer reminded us of the price they placed on our suffering. We refused these settlements, determined to see the case through to ensure the hospital was held accountable, and made changes to prevent future mistakes. Update. Life was finally starting to feel normal again. After a long legal battle, we won a huge settlement from the hospital for their mistake. The court recognized how much pain and suffering we had gone through. With the lawsuit behind us, we decided to focus on our future. As the first birthday of our babies approached, we knew we wanted to celebrate it together with the other family. Despite the complicated start, our children's birthday was a significant milestone for both families. We decided to host a joint party at a nearby park, a place where both families could come together and celebrate the joy and growth of the past year. The day of the party was perfect. With clear skies and a gentle breeze, we decorated a large picnic area with colorful balloons, streamers, and a banner that read, "Happy First Birthday." A big cake, half decorated for our son and half for Ava, took center stage on the picnic table. It was a beautiful symbol of our shared journey and hope for the future. As friends and family arrived, the atmosphere was filled with laughter and happiness. The kids played together on the playground. Jessica and I watched them, feeling a deep sense of gratitude and relief. The Harrisons were right there with us, their faces also lit up with joy. When it was time to cut the cake, both families gathered around, cameras ready to capture the moment. Our son Jake and Ava, each sitting in high chairs, looked curiously at the bright candles flickering on the cake. We sang "Happy Birthday" together. As the babies tasted their first bites of cake, their faces smeared with frosting, everyone cheered and laughed. After the cake, we opened presents. Watching Jake and Ava play with their new toys filled our hearts with a profound sense of peace. That evening, as the sun set and the party wound down, Jessica and I sat with the other family, reflecting on the incredible journey we had all been through.